So you want to learn about seed collecting specifically for mention reason listeners interested in topic.
Okay.
There's actually a
Got
whole
it.
science to it.
Yeah.
It's not just picking things up off the ground.
Right.
We're diving deep into a chapter from this book, Tropical Forest Seed,
Okay.
and it focuses specifically on collection methods.
Yeah.
And you're going to be surprised by all the different ways people collect seeds.
Oh, yeah. It's really quite remarkable. The methods that are used range from, very simple to really high tech and everything in between. And it all depends on what species you're targeting and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, well, the book starts out right away talking about this idea of genetic diversity.
Right.
Why is that so important when we're talking about seed collecting?
Right.
Like, isn't a seed a seed?
Well, think of it this way. Imagine you're building a house and all you have is one type of brick.
Okay.
You can build something, but it's not going to be very resilient if you've only got one type of material.
All right.
Genetic diversity is like having a variety of building materials. Mm-hmm. It ensures the long-term health and adaptability of that population of plants that you're hoping to grow.
I like that analogy. That's good.
Yeah.
So how does that actually play out when you're out there collecting seeds?
Well, collecting from a variety of sources is key.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to be thinking about trees that are spaced out geographically, trees that might be showing different traits, maybe. It's kind of like building a diverse portfolio.
Right.
But instead of stocks, you're investing in the genetic resilience of that species.
That makes me think about something else the book talked about.
Yeah.
Plantation species with undocumented origins.
Oh, yeah.
How do you even begin to make sure there's diversity when you don't even know the plant's history?
It becomes a real puzzle.
Yeah.
Researchers often have to go back and try to trace the history of that species,
Okay.
using everything from historical records to DNA analysis to try to get clues to that original range of genetic diversity so they know better where to collect.
Okay, so let's say you've figured out your target species. You know where it comes from, and you're ready to go out and get those seeds.
Right.
What are some of the actual methods that people use?
Well, let's start with ground collection.
Okay.
Seems straightforward, but it's got its own set of nuances.
Right.
It works best for certain species, those with large seeds, short fruiting season, and seeds that don't deteriorate rapidly.
So sometimes you just wait for nature to do its thing and drop those seeds?
It can be that simple, but even then there are strategies involved.
Like what?
Some species, for instance, they drop all their seeds at once. Others release them gradually.
Yeah.
And that dictates, how often you need to collect to get a good sample. Then sometimes you don't have the luxury of waiting for them to fall.
Right, so then what? You've got to go up and shake the tree or something.
Exactly. Shaking can be a very effective way to accelerate seed fall.
Makes sense.
The book details both manual shaking using hooks and ropes
Oh, wow.
and mechanical shaking, which involves specialized vehicles.
I'm picturing like one of those big mechanical shakers that they use for like olives or something.
Right.
Is there a risk of damaging the tree?
There's definitely potential for damage if it's not done carefully.
Yeah.
You have to adjust the force and the duration of the shaking.
Right.
And of course, positioning those clamps correctly to minimize stress on the tree.
So it's all about that balance efficiency, but you don't want to damage the tree.
Exactly. And that balance plays out when we're talking about all those ground collection methods too.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So I'm picturing picking the seeds up off the ground by hand, but the book talks about other techniques.
Yeah, there's a whole toolkit for ground collection.
Like what?
Rakes, brushes, but even vacuuming are all options.
Wait a minute. You vacuum seeds?
Yeah.
Wow. How does that even work? Doesn't get a lot of debris mixed in?
You're right. Debris is a big consideration with any of the ground collection methods.
Okay.
It makes cleaning the seeds a lot more labor-intensive. And you always run the risk of soil-borne pathogens getting mixed in with the seeds and contaminating them.
Right.
So it's not as simple as it sounds.
So even collecting seeds from the ground is not as straightforward as you might think.
Right.
It makes you realize how important it is to understand the species and what the needs are.
Absolutely.
And how to minimize those risks.
Right.
But what happens when all of those ground techniques aren't enough?
Then we've got to look up to collecting from the crown.
Okay. Now that sounds more adventurous.
It can be.
So we're talking like fearless tree climbers going up there to get those seeds.
Well, it can involve climbing,
Yeah.
but there are also techniques for collecting from the crown while you're still on the ground.
Oh, really? So like using some sort of a long-handled tool to reach up there?
Exactly. Long-handled pruners,
Okay.
fruit pickers, sometimes just shaking or tapping the branches can be enough to dislodge the seeds.
Wow.
And the book even mentions using elevated platforms for those branches that are just out of reach.
So it's like a whole spectrum of techniques, from simple to elaborate, depending on the situation.
It is. And the choice often comes down to balancing accessibility with making sure you're getting a good representative sample of those seeds.
Okay.
Because remember those lower branches, they haven't had the same exposure to sunlight or pollinators as those higher up in the crown.
So there's like a trade-off there, too.
Yeah, potentially.
That's fascinating.
Right. And it makes it really tricky when you're talking about these plantation species.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know the origins, it makes choosing a good collection strategy a real challenge.
Yeah. It's like you need to be a detective and like a skilled climber.
Yeah.
All at the same time.
Well, not necessarily a climber in every case.
Right.
Remember, even for those low-crown species,
Yeah.
there are tools that are designed for efficient collection.
Okay.
The book actually mentions these specialized sheet funnels that they've developed for these kind of spreading branches.
Wow.
So it's all about adapting those techniques to whatever situation you're in.
So there's a lot of thought that goes into every step of this process.
Yeah.
It's not just about grabbing seeds. It's about really understanding the plant and its environment.
Right.
And the long-term implications of what you're doing.
Absolutely.
But let's step back for a second.
Okay.
Why should someone who's not, a botanist or a professional seed collector,
Right.
why should they care about all this?
Well, because seed collection has these ripple effects that go way beyond just the act of gathering those seeds.
Okay.
It's about preserving biodiversity, it's about protecting our food supply and ensuring that these ecosystems are resilient. Every seed holds the potential for a new plant.
Right.
And that plant might provide food, shelter, medicine, all kinds of resources that we depend on.
So the way that we collect seeds today can actually have an impact on the future of the planet.
Absolutely. It's like we're curating this living library of genetic diversity.
Yeah.
And as the pressures intensify, like climate change,
Right.
that library becomes even more important. We need a diverse and adaptable seed bank to draw from so that we can grow plants that can thrive in these new conditions.
It's like having a backup plan for nature itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just about preserving those existing species.
Yeah.
It's about having those genetic resources to adapt to this changing world that we're living in.
Okay. I'm really supposed to see the bigger picture here.
Yeah.
But realistically, not everyone's going to be scaling trees or using specialized equipment.
Right.
So what can the average person do to contribute to this?
There are actually a lot of ways to get involved, even without any special skills.
Like what?
You can support organizations that are working to conserve those native plants. A lot of them have volunteer programs for seed collection and processing.
Okay.
If you have a garden,
Yeah.
focus on growing those native species.
Right.
That way you reduce your need for extra water and resources,
Right.
and you're supporting those local ecosystems.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's a way to connect with nature in your own backyard and be part of something bigger.
Exactly. And speaking of connecting with nature,
Yeah.
there's something we haven't even talked about yet.
What's that?
The beauty of the seeds themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Seeds are incredibly diverse. They come in all shapes and sizes and colors. Some are tiny, like grains of sand.
Right.
Others are large and have these intricate patterns on them. They can be smooth or fuzzy, brightly colored or camouflaged.
Wow.
Each one perfectly adapted to how it needs to be dispersed.
It's like nature's creativity on full display.
It really is.
That makes me want to sweat a seed collection just for their aesthetic value.
Yeah.
It'd be like having a little art gallery of nature's design.
It really would be. And when you think about it,
Yeah.
each of those tiny seeds holds the potential for a whole new plant.
Right.
It's amazing. But let's bring it back to the practical side of things. We
Like
talked
how?
about choosing the right method for collection.
Yeah.
But how do you know which one is best for that particular species or that situation?
That's where the detective work comes in, right?
Exactly. You've got to understand that plant's reproductive cycle, when it flowers, when those seeds mature, how they're dispersed,
Okay.
it's about working with nature's rhythms,
Yeah.
not against them.
Right.
Then you've got to consider the practical things.
Okay.
How accessible is that tree? What equipment do you have available? How much time and resources do you have?
Right.
It's like solving a puzzle,
Yeah.
trying to find the best fit for each situation.
And I imagine there are times when there's no perfect solution
Oh, yeah.
and you just have to adapt
All the time.
and make do with what you've got.
That's the reality of seed collecting. It's
Yeah.
rarely straightforward, but those challenges are part of what makes it so rewarding. It's a
Yeah.
constant learning process,
Yeah.
always pushing you to adapt and innovate.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here,
We have.
from genetic diversity to the challenges of different collection methods.
Right.
But before we wrap things up,
Okay.
I've got to ask, what is the most unexpected or fascinating thing that you've learned about seed collection?
Well, remember that story in the book about the Dipterocarpus alatus seeds in Vietnam?
Oh, yeah, the street trees.
That's the one.
Yeah.
It turns out that those trees planted along the streets and in parks, they're actually a major seed source.
Oh, wow.
But the collectors have to get out there before rush hour hits.
Oh, really?
There's literally racing against traffic to gather those valuable seeds.
So they're dodging cars for seed diversity.
They are.
That's dedication.
It really is. It shows how seed collection can be a race against time.
Wow.
Whether it's traffic or hungry animals or the elements,
Right.
it highlights the need to be really proactive and strategic in those efforts.
Well, that brings us to a perfect point to start wrapping things up for our listener.
Okay.
We've talked about the why behind seed collection,
Right.
these diverse methods that people use,
Yeah.
and even the dedication that it takes to make sure that those seeds are collected.
Absolutely.
But now it's time to bring it back to your own exploration.
Right. As you continue to learn about this, I want you to think about this.
Okay.
Which method speaks to you the most and why? Is it about efficiency?
Yeah.
Is it about minimizing that impact on the environment? Or maybe it's just about appreciating those ingenious ways that nature has figured out how to disperse seeds. Thinking about that will tell you something about how you connect to the natural world and how you want to participate in it.
Yeah, it does. It makes you realize that seed collecting isn't just about the science and the technique.
Right.
There's a real human element to it.
Yeah.
You know, that passion and ingenuity that drives people to do this work.
It's like this hidden world.
It is.
With its own challenges and triumphs, and it's all centered around these tiny little seeds.
Exactly. And that brings up something else we haven't really touched on.
What's that?
This idea of time scale. You're not just dealing with the immediate act of collecting. Every decision you make has these ripple effects into the future.
The diversity that you capture today could impact that whole species for decades or even centuries.
It's a lot of responsibility for these little seed packets.
It really is. It makes you think about the legacy we're leaving behind with each seed we collect.
Yeah.
And it connects to something we haven't talked about yet, seed banking.
Oh, seed banking. What is that?
So seed banks are these collections of seeds that are carefully preserved for the long term.
Okay.
They act as a sort of backup for biodiversity, safeguarding against extinction and providing these genetic resources for research and restoration.
Wow. So they're literally like banks, but for seeds.
In a way, yeah. Some of these banks hold seeds that are hundreds of years old.
Wow.
They're like a snapshot of that genetic diversity from a specific time and place.
That's incredible. Why is that so important to have this kind of like historical record of seeds?
Well, think about all the pressures that are facing our planet right now.
Like what?
Habitat loss, climate change, disease outbreaks.
Right.
Seed banks are like a safety net. They make sure that we don't lose that valuable diversity that we might need to adapt to these challenges. They're also a resource for research. Scientists can study plant evolution, develop new varieties that have certain traits that we need.
Like what kinds of traits?
Drought tolerance, disease resistance, things like that.
So it's not just about preserving the past.
Right.
It's about being prepared for the future.
Exactly. And the diversity in those seed banks is a direct result of the choices that were made during collection.
Right.
That's why it's so important to understand all these methods, from that simple ground collection to those high-tech shakers.
Right. We've gone from the very practical, the hooks and the nets and everything, to talking about the future of the planet and genetic diversity and everything.
It all comes back to that original question.
Yeah.
Why are you interested in seed collecting? What is it you're hoping to accomplish?
That's a great question for our listener to think about. Whether you're starting a garden in your backyard or working on a big restoration project or something, this is just the beginning of your exploration of seed collection.
It is. And as you continue to learn, I want you to think about this.
Okay.
What role do you want to play in preserving this biodiversity? Will you be a seed saver, a gardener, a researcher? Maybe even a seed bank supporter.
Yeah.
There are so many possibilities.
As many possibilities as there are seeds.
Exactly.
And with that, we're going to wrap up our deep dive into the world of seed collection.
Okay.
Remember, every seed holds a story, a legacy, and a future that's just waiting to unfold.
It is.
And it's up to us to collect those stories and help them flourish.